All right. Well, I'd like to thank Bill for inviting me out. The next time that, well, not the next time, but in about 30 years from now, I'll be coming out via the slow boat here, through here, all the way over here, down past my place of birth here in Sault Ste. Marie, and then down to visit Bill. Although who knows, by then we may be senators, Mars, presidents, ambassadors, who knows. So, but that we've got to get the work done now to ensure that that happens. And so, I think these last couple of weeks have been very good. I know that in the meetings where it's very direct, where you actually have two candidates, and it's it's a little paradoxical to some of these union guys, like, okay, well, why the hell are you out here from Detroit? And but it's this quality of saying, look, this is a national mission. What this whole slate represent, or the policy that the slate represents, and it sticks with people. I think just some of the meetings that we've had in the last few days, people are ready to work with Bill's campaign explicitly. Now, some of these guys we're going to have to push them to make sure they follow through, but you can just see it in their eyes. They're used to people coming in and they got no program, no nothing, and all they want is some money for their campaigns. Right? But here we're coming in with a program that's going to put 4 million people to work and restore a sense of national mission. So it was interesting for me because sometimes when I'm in the meetings, it's a little different because these are the people that you're either trying to get their support or you're organizing or whatever. But I had an opportunity to sort of watch how they interacted with Bill, and it was in one case a couple of the guys were just straight out saying we'd like to support your campaign. So we'll have to keep on them, but that means also that everybody in this room has to go like hell. We're in the hot phase of the campaign now, and people should be coming out, organizing. I think it's a wide open situation. This population is sick as can be of Obama and what he represents, and they see the rumblings. This whole international financial system is coming down hard and fast, and with it is this danger of a thermonuclear warfare, which is, it's not an easy one to put your mind around. I know that most of us who've been organizing for basically the last 6 months of going out and telling people this is where we're at. And at first it's only been in the very recent period where, well, it helps when you have the Russian government saying we are about to launch a nuclear first strike on these installations. And as I think Lynn put it at one point, he said the old shit pots in Poland are very full right now. But it is true that people are beginning to see how close we are. So that being said, we got to organize like that, and it is open. There is this police state mentality in the United States, and I'm not going to underplay it because it's real. Most people, they know you're right, but they're not going to be too loud about it. In fact, Lynn made the comment recently that some of the success we've been having in the rural areas is because the Obama money isn't coming into the rural areas, right? The Obama money and the machine to make sure everybody stays in line for the election, that's not there. And so people, because frankly, even in the inner cities, no one likes this guy. No one wants to go along with the policy. They look at Romney, of course, and they say, oh, dear God, will be probably just as bad, and it will be just as bad. But they're not supporting Obama because they like the policy, right? So it's a wide open situation, and I think the way that I just keep hearing this creeping. Okay, a wide open situation, and I think the way that Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who is, it's very interesting to get her insight on these matters because she's been in these fights. She fought like hell when Lynn was in prison and to keep the whole mission alive. And but she's been making the point recently that, in 1989, before the Berlin Wall fell, weeks before it did fall, you had the head of the East German regime saying, we're going for another 1,000 years and nothing will bring us down. And then, of course, a week and a half later, the sledgehammers are coming out and they're bashing this thing down, right? So, in other words, what people sometimes get into is this: they're so big, they're so powerful, there's nothing we can do, but yet they're coming down. One way or another, they are collapsing. The question is, will they take us with them? Right? So we intend to not go down with them, and we are providing the leadership nationally on the only thing that could work. You got to bankrupt these guys with Glass-Steagall. Once that's done, as Bill was going through, there's not enough real money in the system. So we're going to have to put money back into the system to make good on the payments, but that's got to be backed up by something real, right? That's where NAWAPA comes in with. It's the only thing large enough in size and duration and scope to get the job done at this point. So that's where we stand. Now, I just wanted to start out by referencing this, because there's a funny irony, well, not an irony, but the Obama administration is full of all kinds of nasty people, and some of the two that I'll reference today are actually married. It's quite a lovely duo. Bill had mentioned Samantha Power, who is, I don't even know what you call it, somewhere under the National Security Council. It's got one of these, 20-word names that you don't know what it is by the time you get done reading it anyway. Something about prevention of genocide and whatever. But this is the Atrocities Prevention Board. And this is this idea that we don't care about national sovereignty. We don't care about what's going on in your country. I mean, it really would have been like what almost did happen during the Civil War, that we were trying to figure this thing out. Of course, it wasn't some organic thing. This was the British trying to take us over via the South. But the British were going to come in on the side of the South, and it was actually the Russians who said, don't do it. We're bringing ships over into the New York harbor, and if you do it and you don't let them figure it out on their own, we'll attack you. So that's also, I think, a reflection of the historic relationship that we have played, or that we've held with the Russians, which in our better period is around the very fundamental principles of what this nation stands for. I'm going to just take it down, because it's a little... Besides, Bill, I'm behind you. You're not behind me. But yeah, as Bill had referenced with the Treaty of Westphalia, that what they're trying to do, well, what the British are trying to do, right? Because they're the authors of this. This is Tony Blair, the responsibility to protect, right to protect, whatever it is. He outlined it that in the late 90s that we were going to do away with the Treaty of Westphalia, that there was no need for it anymore. This idea, which, the Treaty of Westphalia was based on the idea that the relations amongst nations were that you work to the advantage of the other. It's sort of the do unto others as you would have done unto you concept applied to statecraft. And that stopped the religious warfare of the coming out of the out of the Dark Ages, and then as the Renaissance began, the Venetians moved again to disrupt everything with chaos and divide and conquer tactics. So that ended it, and what Blair is saying is that doctrine, no more. We're going back to the feudal times, right? We're going back to before this Renaissance conception was around, where the empire runs the show. And if we decide that you are committing atrocities, then we're going to invade you. Of course, it's not really about that. It's about all of these operations of Libya, as Lynn was saying. After Libya, they were going to go right into Syria and Iran, which had nothing to do with those nations, but was to go after Russia and China, because Russia and China have said that they are not going to go along with the globalization agenda any longer. And they've committed to economic development, and explicitly, in some cases, as we see with these Terra America articles, it's Lynn's policy. Right? It's not some. They may have their own tradition and their own sense of this, but this was LaRouche organizing them over a decade, telling them that people like Kudrin, their finance minister, had to go, and all of a sudden he gets dumped, and just about everything that Lynn's putting out of policy is beginning to happen in Russia, right? So, and that comes back to the NAWAPA and the question of Arctic development, the question of the Bering Straits Tunnel. That's been put on the table about 3 times in the last month as part of the overall war avoidance policy, right? So this is our time to move, and the British know it. And so there's 2 sides. One is Samantha Power, the responsibility to protect doctrine, the Atrocities Prevention Board, we're going to run these wars and forget the sovereignty of nations. And then the other is the question of just the straight-out fascist police state under Cass Sunstein and what he is now putting forward. So I want to hit these things and address it from the standpoint that it's about sovereignty, national sovereignty and individual sovereignty, which is really, in the end, the same thing, and that what this gets into is the question of, are we capable of self-governance? The United States is an experiment in that. That's what our Constitution is. I always get a kick out of the people that are like, the Constitution, it's been around for too long. It's an old document. We should update it or do something different. And it's kind of like, well, wait a second. If it's been around for a long time, wouldn't that be a proof that it actually works? Every other nation, we're the longest running standing government in the world because of that document. So, so I want to come back and just that question of, are we capable of self-governing, and to look at it a little bit with the question of the separation of powers that exists in the Constitution, which Cass Sunstein's against. So, I want to start out, I want to read this thing from Putin, which puts it on the table on this question of the sovereignty. This is from his speech that he gave when the Russians had defeated the Nazis, which is again another, in addition to the Napoleon, but they've got this tradition that they will not bow down to foreign occupation. And they lost, 20 million people? 27 million people fighting the Nazis. So this is just he says, this is our day of memory, our day of pride and mourning, the day that unites everyone in Russia. 67 years ago, we defeated the terrible and cynical force that was Nazism. We must never forget how that force was born and grew stronger and ever more audacious before the world's very eyes. We must never forget how barbarians planned the destruction of entire peoples and sought to dictate the destinies of whole countries and continents. And he goes on to talk further about what the Nazis did, and then he says, it is our common duty to remember why the war began and to analyze its lessons, which remain just as relevant today. I stress today that strict respect for international law, state sovereignty, and the independent choice of each people is one of the crucial guarantees for ensuring that the tragedy of World War II never happens again. So yeah, so he says it's just as relevant today, and it's this respect for international law and state sovereignty and the independent choice of each people is the crucial guarantee that this won't happen again. So he's not being vague about things, right? He's saying this is now happening again. It was very clear that the international law was violated in the case of Libya and would be violated in the case of Iran and actually right now as we speak, I believe, Congressman Walter Jones is on the LaRouche show with Harley Schlanger and Jeff Steinberg, and he's the one that had introduced the House Concurrent Resolution 107, which says any war of aggression without going to Congress is an impeachable offense. And that was the basics of the 107, which puts it to Obama. You try one more of these Libya operations. I mean, frankly, you should be already impeached, but we'll take it on this. But so this is part of a national mobilization, and also Senator Webb has just put forward, who is a Democrat, has just put forward a bill in the Senate which says that this humanitarian intervention, any one of these without going to Congress, is also a violation of the Constitution. So this is useful and part of a network that works with our military, some of the people that have been working with Lynn to prevent what was the British had intended to be an inevitability, right? To get the war going in Iran and Syria with the intention of pressuring Russia and China to back down from their economic development. That was the point. They had hoped that they could just say, okay, we've got the Ohio-class submarines just lined up, and we're ready to move on this unless you shred your contracts for your space program and your nuclear power plants and your railroads and your dams and everything else that you're doing, and instead take what you got for cash and bail out the euro. That's what they wanted. And the Russians and the Chinese said, no, we know where this is getting you guys. I think we'll let you just go down that road. We'll stick to your old policy, United States. We'll do what you guys used to do. So that's the point, and they keep offering it to us as an offer to work with them. So anyway, so that's what the British want to eliminate, and to eliminate this question of sovereignty amongst nations. Now on the other side, there is what they would prefer to happen. They're insane. The British are insane, but they're not so insane that they would really prefer that the world be incinerated in thermonuclear warfare and then the so-called nuclear winter, which is where all the debris gets put up into the stratosphere or however high it goes and basically blocks out sunlight, and all living things on the planet that require sunlight are gone, which is about 2 years of that apparently. So at that point, they think they've got these underground bunkers and whatever else, and they probably do, but but they wouldn't. They actually don't want that. What they'd like is for nations to volunteer and sign up for all the agreements, which is the environmentalist agreements and the monetarist bailouts and all this, to do what's in Greece at an accelerated process. Just kill off your people. They're committed to population reduction. And I had a discussion. I was here when on the airplane. It was the red eye flying here. And I was like, all right, well, I'm going to just crash out once this plane starts. But what the hell? I'll ask the guy next to me what he does, and just see where he lives, whatever. Turns out he's a career FBI guy who lived in Paris and Vienna and Paris during, probably incriminating somebody here anyway, but longtime guy, knew a lot, and he followed the briefing lockstep, and he was just gripped. It was like 3 hours of the most intense discussion, and what came out was at a certain point, he said, well, I just can't believe it. No, I just can't go there, that they would be this insane for nuclear war. He goes, but on the other hand, and then that's when I said, look, the issue is population reduction. Look, because we started out the whole discussion on the environmentalist thing, and that's why I said it's not about the environment. They want to kill people off. That's the whole point of this. And he said, well, yeah, I probably agree with you on that. And then when I brought up again the population reduction, then he said, okay, he kind of got quiet. He said, okay. And then he says, you know, I can't say that this is totally insane because my son is about to graduate from Navy pilot, and his job is to fly the decked out, basically like a 737, but they deck it all out with all this advanced gear, and he flies the admirals up into the stratosphere so that they can launch the Ohio-class submarine launches from there. So you can't really divorce himself too much from that as an abstract reality when, you know, so anyway, that's where we stand. Now, what they would prefer is the voluntary mass suicide, you could call it. And I just want to make a point, because this is where Cass Sunstein says that this sounds like conspiracy to me, which he wrote a paper called, well, it's called Conspiracy Theories, where he talked about that we have to cognitively infiltrate those that are spreading the false conspiracies. So since it's false conspiracies about the government, that means it's the government who's going to be deciding what the false conspiracies are, which of course is quite funny. But they're going to infiltrate chat rooms, online social networks, or even real space groups. Yeah, real space. I don't even know if people know what that is anymore, but that's the younger generation. And that to find those that have put forward an attempt to explain an event or practice by reference to the machinations of powerful people who have also managed to conceal their role. Well, here's the deal. They don't really conceal it. In fact, they wrote a book about it. They call it the Open Conspiracy. And they'll tell you what they're doing. This is H.G. Wells, right? He was part of the whole Fabian British imperial crowd, which the Fabians, it was, I forget all the details. There's the Round Table Club, and there's it was sort of the outgrowth of what they called what was it called? The spirit of, No, it was Cecil Rhodes. The Dream of Cecil Rhodes is the group. And it was, Wells and Russell came later, but the original ones, Mackinder and and there's the Cliveden set, and they sort of morph around, but the original group was the group with John Ruskin, and this was the pre-Raphaelite artists. People have seen this stuff. It's like all romanticizing the pre-Raphaelites. That's Raphael, sons, the Raphael, Leonardo, the Renaissance thinkers. So we want to go back before the Renaissance because we like the Dark Ages, the pre-Renaissance. So, and they would build these roads by hand, and they were going to do this whole recreating the medieval spirit, and they're nuts. But that's the grouping then that founded the Fabian Society, which the Fabian Society is around, and guess who's a member? Tony Blair, right? So now that's again these things. Does that mean everybody that's a Fabian, or they all? It's just like is everybody a part of Greenpeace? They want to go out and kill 5 billion people on the planet? Probably not. But anyway, the point being, they lay it out here. Now I want to read what Cass Sunstein would like to do. That he says that, actually I'll just read this real quick. He says, so what can government do about conspiracy theories? Among the things it can do, what should it do? We can readily imagine a series of possible responses. Number one, government might ban conspiracy theorizing. I don't know how you do that, but they're going to do that. Then government might impose some kind of a tax, financial or otherwise, on those who disseminate such theories. So that means you guys are all going to have to contribute even more than you already do, because we're going to have to pay our tax to Cass Sunstein. Number three, government might engage in counter-speech, marshaling arguments to discredit conspiracy theories. I don't know. They're having a hard time marshaling anything these days. So, but in the end, they say that government is faced with suppliers of conspiracy theories and might aim, at least in part, to persuade, debias, or silence those suppliers of conspiracy theory. So they're not joking around, and I don't know if any of you have ever heard the phrase about Lyndon LaRouche when somebody, isn't he a conspiracy theorist? Right? So it's pretty clear who they're out to get. And obviously Obama, Cass Sunstein, his wife, we like to give these guys hell because we prefer to not go into the hell that they would like to drag us into. But this is, and if you want to talk about the conspiracy, I'm just going to read the sort of the manifesto portion of the open conspiracy. So it's, it's kind of technical, so you might, I'll kind of summarize it at the end. But so he says, this is H.G. Wells, he says, with the dreadful examples of Christianity and communism before us, we must insist, I don't quite know how he gets those two together, but anyway, we must insist that the idea of the open conspiracy ever becoming a single organization must be dismissed from the mind. It is a movement, yes, a system of purposes, but its end is a free and living, if unified world. At the utmost, 7 broad principles may be stated as defining the open conspiracy and holding it together. And it is possible, even if one of these, the 7th, we'll come back to that, may be, if not too restrictive, at least unnecessary. To the writer, it seems unavoidable because it is so intimately associated with that continual dying out of tradition upon which our hopes for an unencumbered and expanding human future rest. Okay, so these are the 7. Number 1, the complete assertion, practical as well as theoretical, of the provisional nature of existing governments and of our acquiescence to them. So provisional nature meaning they're not going to be around. So why should we acquiesce to the provisional governments that are all going to be gone anyway? Number 2, the resolve to minimize by all available means the conflicts of these governments, their militant use of individuals and property, and their interferences with the establishment of a world economic system. So, the first part, yeah, who wants wars and conflicts and all this, but the solution is to establish a world economic system. Okay, 3, the determination to replace private, local, or national ownership of at least credit, transport, and staple production by a responsible world directorate serving the common ends of the race. So we're going to take everything that you need for existence, staple foods and transportation, your banking, and we're going to put it under the control of a responsible world directorate. How nice. What's that? Yeah, right. Number 4, the practical recognition of the necessity for world biological controls, for example, of population and disease. Number 5, the support of a minimum standard of individual freedom and welfare in the world. Well, thanks. At least we'll get a minimum standard of individual freedom and welfare. I don't know if the world directorate is going to decide what that minimum standard is. And number 6, the supreme duty of subordinating the personal career to the creation of a world directorate capable of these tasks and to the general advancement of human knowledge, capacity, and power. So you don't even get to choose what you want to do. You just have to, if you felt like being a Leonardo da Vinci or a Mozart, sorry, you're going to volunteer your career and your sense of life mission to the whims of the world directorate. So now this is number 7, the one that they are not sure is probably unnecessary. The admission therewith that our immortality is conditional and lies in the race and not in our individual selves. It's funny because isn't that what's the Constitution? Isn't that the binding quality of the Constitution? It's not just our general welfare. It's of the posterity and the fact that somebody did that for us and we intend to do that for somebody else, and that it's a mission that mankind will develop and as we will develop in our own cultural sense, we'll do it as a nation because there's a certain language culture, there's a certain common experience, there's an ability to communicate ideas because we have ironic characteristics of the language, and with the shared history we can pull things out and develop ideas and get people to think and make breakthroughs. But that's not being done for our own personal benefit. It's being done to serve the future of mankind, which they say, Wells will say, that's the unnecessary one, or too restrictive, which is the other point. You don't get to do whatever you want to do. So that's what their idea is that's, of course, is completely against the human soul. And so that's why they need all this social engineering stuff. I just want to reference a few things just because it is relevant to what he said. We're going to infiltrate the chat rooms, online social networks, or even real space groups. I just happened to flip this over and look on the back, and it says Wells, one of the most creative, original thinkers, important idea. He has an important place in the history of ideas. It says in 1928, when he wrote his cry for a new age of worldwide knowledge networking, there was no internet. Yet Wells was already convinced that if only thinking people across the planet could somehow pull together and pool their expertise, energy, and insights into a sort of cerebrum for humanity, then the world would be a saner, safer, better, fairer place. Anyone aware of how the internet already reflects both the vices and the virtues of society and wonders how a world-renowned visionary like H.G. Wells envisaged knowledge, networking, as working in practice will enjoy this book. It is a hymn to the practical possibilities of world group action. So that's kind of funny that that's what they would pluck out of this was Wells. Now here's the funny thing is that this idea of the internet, and specifically the precursor to Wikipedia, the World Information Synthesis Encyclopedia was called. It was this guy Manfred Koken, and he was a member of this group of these social networkers that were the ones that later created all the Facebook and the Twitter and the World of Warcraft and the fantasy world that half our young kids are just completely addicted to, don't know how to do anything, which is why we need to smash the laptops and send them to Alaska, get them for a while, get them something. Yep. Yep. But they were the ones that created that system, and a lot of what you see with like take Russia for example, all these the bloggers and this that all played into the so-called opposition against Putin, totally run through the State Department and the social networkers. So it's just, so yeah, it is the open conspiracy, but what it is to take away what is the soul of humanity, which doesn't want to live under some oppression which demands that you can't develop, that says we can't have population growth, that says, which is simply a reflection of our ability to make a creative hypothesis about the way the universe is organized, apply the hypothesis to create a technology or artistic composition that creates further growth capabilities for our people. And these guys say, no, we need social engineering to get us back to our natural state, which is that of the beast, where we just live in perfect harmony with this unchanging universe. But of course, the universe is changing. And that's what Shauna and the other people in the basement have shown very clearly, is that this universe is constantly developing. And it's not like some, you know how they say survival of the fittest, which, as we've gone through, is sort of a circular argument. Of course, what survives is what's fit, and what's fit is what survives. But it actually has a direction to it. And as we see in the biosphere, all the developments through the different species that have come on the planet and the animal life have always, well, in one sense, there's even an increased division of labor. You have a higher range of biodiversity, but then the relationship between them. But there's a bit where the different species actually can get more done. They have a higher energy flux density. So it really does come back down to human economy has to do the same. And this is what is the foundation of Lynn's economics, and really it's an outgrowth of what Hamilton had laid forward too. And even more than this, it is a function of government. That's what a lot of people, especially the Tea Party group, thinks that government should have nothing to do with the economy. When you read Hamilton, there's a quote where he says the aims of government are commerce, security, and revenue. But you see with his economics is that that's what we did in the American Revolution. That's what we're going to have to do now, today, right? Once we get Glass-Steagall in and wipe this mess of financial paper out, we'll have obligations that we won't have the money to pay, just like they did in the American Revolution. They had all this debt, but they had no way to make good on the debt, and they knew that if they just said, all right, everybody, come get your wallets out, we're going to just start paying this thing off right now, we would have collapsed. And there would have been no point to have fought the American Revolution. And so Hamilton said, we'll take our commitment to pay the debt as our commitment to make good on this. He said we could see it as a national blessing, and we can use that as a foundation to extend further credit. In a sense, go further into debt, but by doing it by the development of the physical economy, you create all kinds of new activity, and the infrastructure gets the speed of the transportation, new ports, all these things that they were doing, then created enough growth that you could start paying down the principal of the debt that was owed. And more importantly, it established the foundation for a paper currency that wasn't simply based on gold or silver or the European banking cartel, but that it was based on the future direction of your society. So the credit worthiness of the paper currency was based on your commitment to the future. So that's, I think, then this question of self-governance. And I just want to read one quote from, because Cass Sunstein, he's not, it'd be one thing if he just had this, thing against conspiracy theorists and Now we've got these camps that are going to re-educate people. We just had a document released. What's that? Yep. But yeah, they just released an Army document which shows that there's already plans to bring the political dissidents in for a nice little re-education process. Make sure that if you have these conspiracy theories in your head, you're going to not remember those anymore. So if Bill or I ever come back one day after a long vacation and you didn't know where we were and LaRouche was wrong, just slap us and tell us we've been staring at Cass Sunstein's dome, his bald spot there, too long. Anyway, but yeah, I want to read this because, yeah, the other part is he's against the separation of powers. There was a paper on Marbury versus Madison, which I don't know all the details of the original case, but it was on the issue of the executive versus the judiciary and what was the boundaries, and this set a certain standard for how you would actually work out these separations of powers. Because that was the whole issue in the Federalist Papers, was how do we actually carry on self-governance? What is if we just had a king, we already know what that does, but you can't have just pure democracy where it's just pure one-to-one representation. So if you have representative government, that could be too much at the whim of the momentary desires of the population. You can get people to whip the people up, and all of a sudden laws are going through that are against the nation. How would you carry out certain executive functions, and then how do you have a check on that, which is what the judiciary is. So you have this quality where it's to ensure that there actually is more freedom with these certain, which you could say are restrictions, but you kind of bound the system to make it actually more free to be free. So, but this is what from James Madison. Actually, let me read this quote from Cass Sunstein. I have to get it here. But on the Marbury versus Madison, he says, okay, this is the Yale Law Journal. It's entitled, "Beyond Marbury, the executive's power to say what the law is." He writes that he's grateful to this guy who had written an article on Carl Schmitt, this guy Adrian Vermeule. Carl Schmitt is the crown jurist of the Nazi regime. He was the one that, the Führerprinzip, which is the leader is the law, he wrote the whole legal justification for that. And this guy writes this article, I forget the name of it, something about demystifying Carl Schmitt. And, just goes through that we're right there with you there on the executive. So this is what Sunstein says. He says, I'm great in the introduction to this, "Beyond Marbury, the executive's power to say what the law is." So he's grateful to this Adrian Vermeule. And then he says, there is no reason to believe in the face of statutory ambiguity, the making of federal law should be settled by the inclinations and predispositions of federal judges. The outcome should instead depend on the commitments and beliefs of the president and those who operate under him. My major goal in this essay is to vindicate the law interpreting authority of the executive branch. So we're not joking around here when we say these guys are going for a Hitler dictatorship. They're very clear on this. And but I want to read this from the Federalist Papers. This is number 51, which goes into, it's the structure of the government must furnish the proper checks and balances between the different departments. Apparently this is from Madison. It says, but what is government itself, but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. A dependence on the people is, no doubt, the primary control on the government, but experience has taught mankind the necessity of auxiliary precautions. So these guys were going through this very solid debate on, if we were all angels, we wouldn't need to be, we wouldn't need government. And likewise, if we were just being, the angels were telling us what to do, we wouldn't need internal or external controls. But since it's men governing men, then how do you, if you're going to set up a government, how do you make sure it has the authority to govern, but then doesn't become corrupt and is capable of being? So they were going through all these issues. And just later in the paper he says, justice is the end of government. It is the end of civil society. It ever has been and ever will be pursued until it be obtained, or until liberty be lost in the pursuit. In a society under the forms of which the stronger faction can readily unite and oppress the weaker, anarchy may as truly be said to reign as in a state of nature, where the weaker individual is not secured against the violence of the stronger. And as in the latter state, even the stronger individuals are prompted, by the uncertainty of their condition, to submit to a government which may protect the weak as well as themselves. So in the former state, will the more powerful factions or parties be gradually induced, by a like motive, to wish for a government which will protect all parties, the weaker as well as the more powerful. So, that's what we're dealing with. You got a government which is different factions. And, in one sense, aren't we, maybe people would identify in different ways with the LaRouche and the movement, but we represent a certain conception. And we, in one sense, are a minority, yet we can actually have profound influence on the majority and on the institutions at the top level because of the way this system was set up. Yet, we have a system of government which protects our ability to exist as long as we're not violating gross, elements of natural law and killing people and all that. But we have the right to exist, and it's necessary that there be this quality of dissent so that there can be an ongoing discussion about how to fulfill then what it is the judiciary branch actually is to enforce, which is the highest principled conception that's laid out in the Constitution. Because we as men, it'd be great if we could all operate as angels and follow the rules of our system, but we're not. So that's why he says, the primary, but experience has taught mankind the necessity of auxiliary precautions. In other words, it'd be nice if we were all angels, but we're not going to be, so let's set it up that we have these systems of checks and balances, which Cass Sunstein says, wipe it all away. We don't need it. And if you're in this room and you're one of the conspiracy theorists, time to get you re-educated, while my wife, meanwhile, destroys sovereignty by launching... Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is the point that's been pointed out is, sounds kind of like a conspiracy to me. The history of government and the history of this nation is the ability to conspire. So I'll just leave it at that, but I just want to come back that these are, the other point to be made on this is the question of the posterity, of actually ensuring that the coming generations exist and can function, comes back to economics. Physical economics, and it's LaRouche's economics, which is the highest expression yet of the science of physical economy. As Lynn says, was probably Leibniz being one of the first ones, but it's had progressions along the way. And so what NAWAPA represents is not just the big jobs bill, although it's that. And that's a lot of these union guys definitely appreciate the sound of 4 million jobs and probably an additional 2 with everything else that will occur around it. They also, especially the operating engineers, just to give you a quick few things, I've done this before, but I think it's kind of fun to, the amount of water that, like 160 million acre feet a year, just to, because it can be, first off, what's an acre foot, or maybe first off, what's an acre, you know, but what it, acre, well, an acre, you know, it's, what, I guess, 66 feet this way, 660 feet this way, and a foot deep. So you can imagine a big aquarium that big. So 160 million of those aquariums are flowing per year. So if you had like a big hose that could shoot that water out, it would fill up 2.5 Olympic-sized swimming pools every second. Just to give you kind of like, and the current agriculture, the land irrigated right now uses, of the entire United States, uses 144 million acre feet. So this is already potentially, if applied to agriculture alone, we'll use it for other stuff, but could double food production or irrigated land. The amount of earth and dirt moved is 27 billion cubic yards, which I just, you know, oh wow, that's big, I guess. So I decided to try to figure out like how big that would be. And I realized that if you took the Empire State Building and you put 3 of them on top of each other, this way, and this way, and created a big cube of dirt, that's what 27 billion cubic. You can just imagine like a little backhoe just sort of kind of going, right? And then the concrete is 3 billion cubic yards, I think, or maybe it's 9, well, whatever it is, it worked out to be that was 1.5 World Trade Centers this way, that way. That's a lot of concrete. And then the amount of steel, 440 million tons of steel, would be 2 railroad tracks going around the earth 72 times. So just to give you just some magnitudes, so it's not quite so like, wow, that's a lot, but I don't even know what an acre is. So, you know. So these guys that, you know, you go into the trades and these are numbers. They have different relationships to the numbers. They'll, you know, 440 million tons of steel. But that's the question of self-government and the question of Glass-Steagall, national banking, and NAWAPA. That's what it is. That's what it was when Hamilton was working through the Federalist Papers. That's what it was when the question of the national banking was. These are never like abstract things that are just these rules that are set up. It's a result of a historical process. And we're now in a historical process where the range of things to do, it's not like there's some other better plan, but we just decided we like this one better. This is the only thing that's going to work right now. And it's the only thing that's going to secure our ability to have self-government. So I'll just leave it there.